Hi everyone, today we're talking about extroverted intuition, also through the lens of Carl Jung, basically continuing the series that I started about a month ago, discussing the cognitive functions from the perspective of Carl Jung in his book Psychological Types. The way I've been doing this with the thinking and feeling functions was that I took that part from Jung's book, started reading it, giving certain paragraphs, analyzing it, giving my interpretations, and maybe other ideas associated with it that come to mind while I read it. And today I'm going to do the same, but this time for extroverted intuition, which is the first perception function. So all about that in the next few minutes. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and let's dive in. So, extroverted intuition is one of the perception functions. For those of you who's not familiar with this concept, basically in Jungian typology, intuition and sensing are perception functions, whereas feeling and thinking are judging functions. And this should not be confused with the J and the P from the end of the type, because the way MBTI has created this is slightly different from Jung's original words. So if one is an INTJ, for example, with dominant introverted intuition is a perception function, even though the INTJ is a J type. So this should not be confused. Anyway, we mean perception functions, so intuition and sensing, the functions that allow us to perceive whatever information comes to us through different ways, unconsciously, consciously, intuitively, or in a sensation-oriented fashion. So I'm going to start talking a little bit about how Jung saw the extroverted intuitive type. So the way we know it today is ENTP and ENFP, and basically go through some of the quotes and ideas that he presented in Psychological Types. And I'm going to start by reading this paragraph. Whenever intuition predominates, a particular and unmistakable psychology presents itself. The intuitive is never to be found among the generally recognized reality values, but he is always present where possibilities exist. He has a keen nose for things in the bud, pregnant with future promise. He can never exist in stable, long-established conditions of generally acknowledged, though limited value, because his eye is constantly raging for new possibilities. Stable conditions have an air of impending suffocation. So what Jung is trying to say here with respect to the NE types, extroverted intuitive types, is that one of their main characteristics is the need to explore new ideas and new possibilities. It's an orientation towards the future, and basically all of the unknown potential directions that something might take us into. This is why NE types are often described to be very curious about as many new possibilities as possible, because this is what inspires them to continue their journey, to find this enthusiasm to build on something, to explore something, to spread their consciousness in many different new directions. And I like how Jung basically highlighted this idea, the bud pregnant with future promises. So basically he's trying to say that the extroverted intuitive type might see something that doesn't seem to be very impressive in the present moment, but because of the future promises or future possibilities that thing can turn into, it makes this type very likely to stay with it, to see where it leads. Because this future promise is basically the biggest stimulator, or the thing that makes them the most excited. He seizes hold of new objects and new ways with eager intensity, sometimes with extraordinary enthusiasm, only to abandon them cold-bloodedly, without regard and apparently without remembrance, as soon as their range becomes clearly defined and a promise of any considerable future development no longer clings to them. As long as a possibility exists, the intuitive is bound to it with thongs of fate. So I find it really interesting how this orientation of the intuitive towards the extroverted side makes these people very, very interested in anything that is new, anything that is different, anything that changes. And through that, this promise of a considerable future development is what triggers these types to continuously look for that, because this is the way that they see their ideas evolving. I mentioned in one of my previous videos, I was talking to an ENTP, a close friend, who was explaining to me how she sees ideas in her mind as bar charts. And these bar charts go higher and higher the more she understands something, the more an idea builds and grows into her mind. And it's not so much about the practical implications or the specific sensory world actions of those ideas, but rather what they mean to her and how they keep growing and inspiring her to understand more about them. And I think this is a really, really, really good insight into how the minds of ENFPs and ENTPs specifically work. To an extent, INTPs and INFPs as well, but primarily for ENTPs and ENFPs, because they are the ones who have the highest need for this novelty in terms of possibilities and ideas. Okay. Neither reason nor feeling can restrain or discourage him for a new possibility, even though it may run counter to convictions unquestioned. So basically, thinking and feeling, of course, are the second and third functions for ENTPs and ENFPs. And what Jung is trying to point out here is that this continuous running around for new possibilities, new future developments, new ways of looking at something is so important and so inspiring to NE types that the thinking and feeling judgments, which might make them feel a bit more like, to be tempered in a way, they don't work. And basically the ENTPs and ENFPs continuously flow around for those new things, for the novelty that inspires their ideas to grow. Neither can we detect in him any great respect for his neighbor's convictions and customs. In fact, he is not infrequently put down as an immoral and ruthless adventurer. And this one is kind of funny because it makes me think of, how we stereotypically associate introverted sensing with tradition or rules or the tried and tested, whereas technically extroverted intuition is supposed to oppose that. So to hate customs, hate traditions, hate rules, hate things that, are too much tried and tested, and will always favor the new approaches. Like Barney in How I Met Your Mother, in my opinion, a pretty clear ENTP, had this really, amazing quote that he used all of the time: new is always better. And in my opinion, it clearly highlights the way that the minds of ENTPs and ENFPs work. Since his intuition is largely concerned with outer objects, sending out external possibilities, he readily applies himself to callings wherein he may expand his abilities in many directions. Merchants, contractors, speculators, agents, politicians commonly belong to this type. Basically, this is where Jung highlights the natural gifts and natural talents of this personality type, or these personality types, because he shows how this intuitive yet extroverted nature allows them to be very flexible and adaptable with respect to the people or the situations that they interact with. Such women understand the art of utilizing every social opportunity. They establish right social connections. They seek out lovers with possibilities only to abandon everything again for the sake of a new possibility. And, in the interaction style theory, we call ENTPs and ENFPs to be starters. Those who are much more likely to be excited by the beginning of something and less likely to take things to completion. And I think this quote from Jung perfectly highlights that. He is the natural advocate for every minority that holds the seed of future promise. His capacity to inspire his fellow men with courage or to kindle enthusiasm for something new is unrivaled, although he may have forsworn it by the morrow. He animates it, he presents it in plastic shape and with convincing fire. He almost embodies it. It is not a mere histrionic display, but a fate. So I think this is a perfect description of how ENTPs and ENFPs naturally are, in the sense that because of this passion for novelty, this passion that they have for the ideas that they believe in, they have the ability to kind of set fire to them, but in a positive way, to inspire others to join them on these new adventures, again related to their interaction style, starters, or get things going. They get things going by inspiring other people to join, by saying such convincing, persuasive things that others want to kind of embark on that journey as well. And then, basically, at the end of his description, Jung basically talked about sensation, in this case, introverted sensation, which is what the extroverted intuitive kind of suppresses. And he says, not that he means to be inconsiderate or superior, he simply does not see the object that everyone else sees. His oblivion is similar to that of the sensation type, only with the latter, the soul of the object is missed. For the oblivion, the object sooner or later takes revenge in the form of hypochondriacal, compulsive ideas, phobias, and every imaginable kind of absurd bodily sensation. And I think this is, again, very, very well described, because ENTPs and ENFPs often struggle with their stress about their bodies and the fact that, oh, maybe I'm sick, or maybe there's something wrong with my body. And their inferior introverted sensing makes them think that things are much more catastrophic than they actually are with respect to their bodies. And again, in Jung's writing, I think this paragraph basically describes it very well. So yeah, this is basically my analysis of how I see Jung's description of extroverted intuition, and more specifically the extroverted intuitive type, ENTPs and ENFPs. I'm really curious what other things you have come up with, what other things you understand from Jung's description. Please feel free to share your thoughts below. And again, thank you a lot for watching and being with me. See you next week with another video.